Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our weekly Sermonette. I hope everybody's doing well and your families are all doing well. Um, this past week was the yahrzeit of a fellow Chabad chassid. His name was Rabbi Moshe Greenberg. Now, Rabbi Moshe Greenberg lived in Bnei Brak, had a very, very large family. But in his youth, he actually endured the frosty horrors of the Russian gulags, and then miraculously he was liberated and immigrated actually to Bnei Brak, Israel. And as I said, he has a very large family who are shluchim of the Rebbe in many, many exotic places across the world, the Far East, Alaska, different states here across America. And one of his son-in-laws, a dear friend of mine, Rabbi Avrami Wolf, told me one time that at one point in his life, he asked his father-in-law if he had any regrets in life. And to give some background to the answer that he gave him, you see, Rabbi Greenberg, as a young lad of 19 years old, back in the late 1940s, in the 1940s, he was actually, him and a group of young men tried to escape Russia across the Russian border so that they should be able to immigrate to Israel and live freely as Jews, and they were caught. And they were sent to a Russian prison, at that point indefinitely for the rest of their lives. And the Russian prisons weren't exactly, to live as a Jew in a Russian prison was basically impossible. But Rabbi Greenberg, then he wasn't a rabbi at the time, but he decided, him and one of his other friends that were arrested, that they are going to live as Jews, which meant that no matter what come and what may be, they are going to keep Shabbos and they're going to keep kosher. Now, just understand the food situation in a Russian prison was that basically every single day, each person would only get 400 grams of bread, 2 sugar cubes, and a bowl of soup. Now, to make things in the bowl of soup, they actually put in some animal bones of some sort, which was obviously made that out of the question for him to eat. So all he was left with was his bread and his 2 sugar cubes. On that, they survived, that and water. Now, the problem is that when it came to Pesach, obviously the bread was now out of the question. So they traded their bread with other prisoners for their sugar cubes. And for the 8 days of Pesach, they would eat only sugar and the water, very little sugar and water, and on that is what they survived. They had this amazing conviction. So he said on the last day of Passover, where they were out on their cot waiting literally for the holiday to end, they were out, living on thin air. Anyways, to make a long story short, he says, how did they know when the holidays were? They didn't have a Jewish calendar. And sometimes you wonder what day of the week it is, and you lose track of time, and you need something to reference you. Well, they didn't exactly have a calendar to figure this all out. So from the letters that they would write with their family, they would hint to them, about Rosh Hashanah, about Pesach, and they would be able to keep track. Now, anyways, one year it happened that they actually he miscalculated, and he started Passover a day early, which meant that at the end of Passover, he also ended it a day early. So he answered to his son-in-law, Rabbi Greenberg answered his son-in-law, he says to him, you want to know what I regret? He says, I regret that one day, the last day of Passover, that I ate bread. Amazing conviction. And it's amazing, he says the story, that when he told this when he repeated the story and told his son-in-law what he regretted, there was 60 years later and he had tears in his eyes. So sometimes we wonder, where does such a person get this inner strength, which literally to risk his life for every single mitzvah? So firstly, Rabbi Greenberg came from good stock. His father was the shochet in town who risked his life for the sake of keeping kosher at the time, and so on. But actually, in when he was 12 years old, World War II broke out. And at the time, they tried to run away from Romania. His family tried to run away from Romania towards Russia. They ended up in Kazakhstan, in Tashkent. And when they were there, his father sent him to study in a cheder that was there in Tashkent, which was under the Chabad Hasidim, a hidden cheder that was under the Chabad Hasidim. And he says from them he learned this self-sacrifice for Judaism. Now, who were these Chabad Hasidim that were there at that time? So that takes us to this coming Shabbos. This coming Shabbos is the 12th of Tammuz. The 12th of Tammuz is a date on the Hasidic calendar. It's the day that the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was liberated from Soviet prison in 1927. He was arrested for spreading Judaism in the former Soviet Union, which was against the law at the time. Now you see, in 1921, which was immediately following the Bolshevik Revolution and the communist movement at that time, which was calling for a holy war against Judaism, against any practice of Judaism, and tried to extinguish the flame of Judaism forever at the time. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe made a fateful trip to Moscow, and there he took a group of 9 of his Hasidim, and he was the 10th of that minyan, if you want to say, and he made a pact together. These 10 Jews made a pact that they would not let the flame of Judaism be extinguished, and they made a pact that even to the last drop of blood, they would be willing to sacrifice their lives to keep Judaism alive. And they fanned out across the former Soviet Union, establishing cheders, underground Jewish schools, establishing mikvahs, synagogues, and the underground. And most of these people, actually, most of those, that the group of that 10 actually didn't survive. Many of them were caught, arrested, taken and shot, and their burial places were not known. So here we are now. It was the generation that was trained by these people that actually were running the cheder in Tashkent, where Rabbi Greenberg was learning with his brother, and learned that inner true self-sacrifice. And those were the ones that gave him the example, and in whose footsteps he followed. Now, the Rebbe has spoken several times about that group of 10 and the pact that they made about what we call self-sacrifice for Judaism, Mesiras Nefesh. And the Rebbe asked the question, what is the lesson for us today? Because today's days, nobody has to literally sacrifice their life for the practice of Judaism and have a connection with Hashem, with God. So the Rebbe explained that actually the words in Hebrew for self-sacrifice, Mesiras Nefesh, literally means handing over your soul, in a sense, is really more that word soul could also be translated as will. It's about handing over your will, sacrificing your will for God's will. And that strong self-sacrifice of that is something that is demanded today as well. And the question is, where does the average Jew of our generation get the strength for such self-sacrifice, even just turning over one's will for the sake of the will of God? Actually comes from this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, we have a double parsha, Chukat and Balak. And the famous stories of this parsha is where the king Balak hires the prophet Bilam to curse the Jewish people, and instead of cursing them, the most beautiful blessings and the praises of the Jewish people are in this week's parsha. And one of the statements that he uses, which is a very famous line, it says, "Hen am levadad yishkonu v'gayim lo yitchashav," which is that, referring to the Jewish people, it is a nation that will dwell alone and will not be reckoned among the nations. And in this verse, Bilam, the prophet Bilam, establishes, if you want to say, the secret of Jewish survival, that when wherever the Jewish nation settles in any type of place, they remain alone. They remain separate. What it means to remain separate, it doesn't mean that we don't get involved, we don't benefit the community, we don't benefit society, we don't make the best of it. But we have to remember that our value system is different. Our value system and our foundation is coming from a different place. And in that, we dwell alone. Today's days, fads come and go, values come and go, morals come and go. They are so temporary, and you don't know what tomorrow brings and what's today. And everybody feels that they have to go along with the waves of the time. That's not what Jews do. Hen am levadad yishkanu. We are a nation that dwells alone. And we come from something, we have our own set of values and wills that come from God that we need to sacrifice ourselves to, come what may be. And, and we see that in today's days. Today's days, it might be in a different way. Where does a college student have the strength that when everybody else is eating from wherever they're eating, but they are going to take the kosher meal and make sure that they keep kosher? Where do we get the strength for a young kid who's going to the stadium on the intermediate dairies of Pesach when everybody's eating their hot dogs and buns, but he's eating his matzah because it's Pesach and he's proud to do so? Where is it that you get, the great fan, sports fan that wouldn't miss a game at no cost for anything, but this time he's not going to be at the game because it's Yom Kippur, and he's proud to tell his friends, I will not be there, even though his family has season tickets in the front row? Where do we get the strength to stand up against whatever it might be, whatever morals to say, we go by a different set of rules, and proudly so, because I am Jewish? That comes from this statement by Bilam from the Torah. Where does the strength come from? That hidden verse in that same verse. So where do we get the strength from? Where can we take? What is our foundation? So actually Bilam, just conclude with this thought, Bilam, in the beginning of that statement that he says, there's another verse that he says, before that he says, from the very beginning, from their beginning, referring to the Jewish people, I see them as mountain peaks and behold them as hills. And Rashi explains that these mountain peaks, these rocks, who are they? The rocks are our patriarchs and the hills are our matriarchs. That they also didn't go with the flow of their time. If you look at the stories of our patriarchs and matriarchs, they stood up with a value system, was against the tide, against the time. And that's what made us. That was the foundation that we come from. Now, not just our matriarchs and patriarchs of the Bible, but if also we look at the matriarchs and patriarchs of our previous generations who sacrificed everything, what it was to be able to stand up for Jewish values and Judaism at a time where it wasn't so popular, where a time where it took the risks of their financial situation, whatever else it might be, it's on their foundation that we stand. So thank God today's days we live in a time where everybody can practice Judaism. There's no risk to our lives. There's no risk to our well-being to be able to practice and proudly be Jewish, but it takes a little risk of our own will to be proud of who we are and what we stand for. And that is really what this week's Parsha comes to tell us, that we have to stand alone, not just go with the waves of the time. There's an expression, it says, how do you know if a fish is alive? Not if it's going with the tide. If a fish is going with the flow, then it means it's dead. How do you know a fish is alive? When it's going against the tide, when it's going, and it shows its strength of going against the tide of the water, that shows that it's truly alive. So let us hope that we should be able to have the strength in this time where things are just waving in different directions and all different things that we feel that we have to go along with it. Let us know that our survival is Hen am levadad yishkanu. We are a nation that stands alone, stands strong, stands not on an ancient Torah, but on a Torah that is rooted, tested, and proven to weather all storms and all situations, and will weather if we stay strong with that and that pride, and learn from the lessons of the Torah, learn from the lessons of the foundations that the Rebbes have given us, what the previous Rebbe plowed away through difficult sacrifice of life and blood. We don't have to do that. We just have to stand up with our strong will. People are looking for us. We're supposed to be a light unto the nation. People want to be able to have that rootedness and that groundedness. Let us hope that we should be able to be that. And, sometimes we get tested. I think that's the test of our times today. Let us teach our children to be proud and be strong of who they are. And let us hope that quickly and speedily we should merit to be able to be reunited with all those people that we mentioned from the previous generations, as this Galus will come to an end with all its negative side effects as well. May it be speedily in our days. Amen. Thank you.